I'm really glad to be here. I'm a teacher by profession, but and so it's my habit to talk, but I'm glad that we are reversing the role. Okay, so I'm here to listen more and listen to eminent people in the field. We have all seen that we have people from a variety of backgrounds. Okay, so Bahar is from wildlife. We have an ecological economics. We have people from law and policy and political history and so on, which is quite apt because the theme itself is multidimensional. Okay, and the earth and its environment is a huge area. And there are physicists talking about it, chemists talking about it, biologists talking about it, economists talking about it, policymakers talking about it, and of course the common man. So it's quite apt that we have a diverse panel, but even this diversity is quite inadequate. Okay. Among these people with large experience and expertise, I represent the confused common man. I too have a background and have worked with a variety of things. I worked with wildlife, I worked with birds, I worked with people, forest dwellers and city dwellers, and I tried to study behavioral economics with them. I tried to study evolutionary psychology. And the end result of having a wide exposure is that I'm confused. Okay. So perhaps I'm the right person to ask question. The way we are going to go is we will ask everyone to relate their own experience and their views to begin with in a few minutes, okay, in a short while, and then that would automatically trigger a dialogue between us. Okay, so I don't think I am going to ask questions to everyone. As the dialogue begins, let it go naturally. Okay, and as we feel we can cross-question each other and the dialogue goes. The last few minutes are kept for the audience questions. Okay, fine. So let me just begin by saying a couple of things that we are talking about save the earth, and by default, this is an anthropocentric view. Okay, the earth has undergone tremendous fluctuations in climate. Today's climate change talk is nothing beyond that. More than 99% species that have evolved have been extinct already. So if humans are extinct, it doesn't make any difference to the earth, right? We are essentially talking about save ourselves and save the things, save the environment that we like. Okay. So it is essentially a human-centered view, anthropocentric view, but there is nothing wrong in it. We are humans, so we will talk about, you will have a human-centered view. But there are a variety of players in this, a variety of humans with different interests, and there is a conflict between these different groups. So I often see this not as a man versus nature conflict, but a conflict between different interest group among us. Okay. And let us hear about the experiences and views of all the speakers before naturally the dialogue begins. So, Barkha, will you start? Bahar. Sorry. It's natural to confuse.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Watve. Thank you so much for and for the introduction and for setting the context for this panel. You talked about being confused. My state of mind currently is extreme jealousy. And I say jealousy because I wish to be 15 again. And I wish to be joining the climate strikes which are happening across the world. I want to bunk school, I want to bunk college, and I want to join millions of those children and college students who have taken to the streets to remind us all about climate change. So mine is extreme jealousy at the moment. Just to introduce myself and some of the work that I've done over the years, a very strange CV I've had. I started by rescuing injured monkeys. I used to run an ambulance for them in Delhi, and then decided that I would work with snake charmers. You were talking about how you used to rescue snakes. And then spent the next 10 years as a broadcast journalist chasing politicians and mining mafia, looking at, for instance, illegal mines operating on forest land. So a rather odd career trajectory. I'm going to start by making a very shameless plug, which is that my book is just out. It's called Rewilding India. And this literature festival is very special to me because it's the first festival where this book is coming out. So if you get the time, it's at the bookstall out there. Even if you don't want to buy it, that's fine, but just browse through it and see if you like it. So I'll stop here and then we can have a more flowing conversation.
Sure. Let us go. The sequence is random, so.
So I'm an American living in Hong Kong, and I think as the American, one of the American on the panel, actually, Charles, you're technically American. That's why I hesitated. In any event, I think my starting point is that I'm disgusted if I'm talking about where I am on my emotional spectrum, as opposed to jealous. I'm disgusted with where things are at in the United States in terms of respect for science and attention to the climate problem. I think that it's absolutely insanity where the U.S. government is going in those two areas. But I've also had the pleasure for 8 years of working for the U.S. government in China on clean energy technology. And what I did see in that program was that, first of all, China is pushing ahead with an incredible investment in clean energy research. They are a 70% coal-consuming country, and they're looking at improving how coal produces carbon, the degree to which it does. They're also looking, though, at alternative energy sources, which is incredible given the reliance on coal. So my views are shaped by that background, but also by more recently, I live in California part-time, and one of the areas that I live in is Santa Barbara, and we had horrible fires that devastated a rather large area of California, and between that and the ferocity of the storms we're seeing on the East Coast of the United States, if you think we're human-centric, I'm very American-centric. But between those two factors in terms of the impacts of climate change, as we now call it, because that's a more polite term than global warming, it's pretty scary, and I've seen the impact directly. I do see, however, a positive side for me personally. I'm looking at moving from California to Washington State, where it's a little cooler climate and wetter. But climate change is actually going to improve the weather in Washington State, so our family can look forward to that. And at that, I will leave it to you.
Thank you, Stacy. I am Mangesh Kashyap, and from last several years, more than 20, I am working in the field of ecological economics, especially focusing on water governance and economics, basically. Unfortunately, our population in India, basically, we doesn't give that much respect to water. And as far as my knowledge, the water is the key of success, water is the key of wealth, water is the key of the entire economy. And how we are going to treat with the water. We are not having communication with the water. When we think about the good governance, bad governance, and we are recently discussing about the climate change and entire very water stress area in the world, I think that in next World War may be on the issue of waters. Unfortunately, I am not a person who is in the good books of politicians or bureaucracy, because I always find some mistakes. That is not my mistake, because I observe what should be there and what should not. Unfortunately, many our politicians, they are having loyalty with some other persons, some other institutes and all other. Whenever we visited n number of projects driven by government, non-government agencies, or big projects like Ujni Dam and all. And what I observed that there is a very badly mismanagement about the water utilization. And the basic thing what I observed that is public education. We need to educate common man, we need to educate politicians, we need to educate bureaucrats. Basically, bureaucrats is a very important part because they know how to handle the policies and all these things. Common man doesn't know how water works for them, how water is a wealth for them. We have to taught them, we have to educate them about the water's other parameter. But it's a social, economical, environmental and political scenario where we have to take water in deeply. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So, thank you. I will make 2 points, and we can elaborate later during the conversation, but there's 2 things I would like to sort of put out there for our thinking. One is an issue that I feel very strongly about is migration. People move. People move around. They've always have. We all moved around. Nobody's where their ancestors used to be. If you go back far enough, certainly. And people move for different reasons. And I don't really care if the reason is because of war or because of economic requirements. But one thing which is exacerbating some of the moves and creating some geopolitical pressure is migration caused by climate change. People are leaving their farms because they've dried up, or they're leaving their floodplain because it's floods every year. There are slow onset crises, such as sea level rise and droughts. There are rapid onset crises, storm surges, cyclones, fires, and so forth. So people are displaced, and sometimes this displacement is tied to other issues. So in Syria, for example, when there's a serious drought caused by climate change, and people then turn to the government and say, well, we have no bread, and the government doesn't provide bread, civil war. Would there have been a civil war in Syria without climate change? Quite possibly, but certainly climate is a factor. And when countries are, where it gets global exposure is when the migration crosses borders, and we certainly are seeing in many countries, not just in the United States and in Europe, but throughout Central America, throughout Latin America, throughout in Africa. There's been some in South Africa. They've had some issues with immigration, violent treatment of immigrants, and so this is exacerbating some geopolitical tensions. And people always want to go in. Is this person a refugee? Are they an economic migrant? Is climate involved in that? It's a combination of all of this, and I don't really care. If somebody wants to move, historically people move. And most people move within countries. So by 2050, 70% of the planet, or 70% of the population of the planet will live in urban areas, especially large cities. And are they equipped to deal with the influx of people from, not from those cities? Are they equipped to deal with climate change? If it's a big coastal city, like it was out in Mumbai last week, it's the wettest monsoon in 70 years or something like that. It's just going to get worse. Do you really need more people moving to Mumbai? Is Mumbai prepared to deal with this? Is the infrastructure that they're building now, which is expensive, the right infrastructure for the climate that's going to exist in 2030, 2040, 2050? That costs a lot of money. Do we want all the people to move there in the first place? That's a good question. So I'd like to sort of throw that out there and think about it, but the majority of people who are moving because of changes of climate are staying within their countries, and that is going to create, even in especially in a big country like India, that is actually going to create some discomfort within the country that policymakers are going to have to think about. And that would just lead to a second point that I'd like to make quickly, which is thinking about the big picture. So don't wait for the crisis. Don't wait for the climate to change completely. Think about what we're trying to do. If we're looking at the world of 2050, and I think we have to look well into advance, we're not looking at 2030. We look well into 2050, what sort of issues do we need? And one of those is economic. we need to make sure there's economic development, economic sustainability. It's easy for us to say, let's not use any energy at all, and let's not use any plastics, and let's not do anything. But that may not be realistic. And if we're going to increase poverty by going back 10,000 years in our technology, we're actually not solving the problem. So let's think of how we can have sustainable development and address the climate issues at the same time.
Yeah, so, yeah, so since you mentioned climate change, okay, and I said I'm representing the confused common man. So we hear about it quite often. Okay. The question is, well, we understand that it can have so many effects, so many disastrous effects, but what I can do about it? Okay. What should a common man do? What can I do and what I should do? Both are important questions. The question is not only to you, but to everyone.
First thing I would say is vote. If you don't like your politicians, you don't think they're doing the right thing, vote for different ones. And that's true of everything. And I think it is important to think, if I said 2050, the majority of people who are going to be alive on this planet in 2050 are not alive right now. Think about that. The population growth, especially China, India, Africa, Europeans are all dying out, North Americans are dying out, Japanese are dying out. These are the areas. And those people who are alive are most of the people in the room here. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, I may or may not be alive. You probably, I hope you all will be alive. And so what is the world you want? And young people often don't vote enough.
I come from a policy perspective, and I also would concur that you want to vote for leaders who will institute the right policies and take the right action. I think that the significant change, the most impactful change, is not going to be whether you recycle and whether you don't drive a car on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Those will be good, and you should do those things because we all need to contribute. But what really needs to change is large-scale industrial policy, which relies on the government changing the policies and industry adopting the policies that will improve the environment. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's all large-scale. The problem is big, and we need the largest polluters to change their behavior, and otherwise we're not going to win this war. It is really as simple as that. The additional points I would want to make is that, again, it still is government, but they need to fund the research and the development of the technology that will improve our lives while reducing our carbon output. And lastly, I think to Charles's point, we need to prepare in anticipation of that migration we were talking about. Again, I'll talk about China. They have enormous intentional migration. They're moving people out of the rural areas into cities, into massive cities, immense cities, quite intentionally, but they're doing it in a very, relatively speaking, planned way. I think the whole world needs to look at migration and prepare to either receive or mitigate the movement of people, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, in continuation with that, as Dr. Watve said, how common man can involve in this climate change and what type of solutions. According to me, we have to educate common man in his regional language, because language is the very important part. One another thing, what I suggest that we have to reduce our water footprint, food footprint, carbon footprint, and we have to adopt the new green energy, green economy, green transactions amongst the culture and country-wise. We have to be. Unfortunately, because of lack of proper education, it might be in South continent or in Asian continent, there are some countries which are not aware about all these seriousness of this climate change problem. So water footprint, of course, what is the requirement of your food, what is the requirement of your water, and how much water we are just wasting every day. What is my experience is that in Pune, sir, Watve sir, definitely, I would like to contribute this. We met near about 150 hoteliers, restaurants, and we request their owners, instead of giving full glass of water, why don't you give half glass of water or reduce the size of the water? You know that they have accepted this concept, and they save near about more than 2 crores of 2 crore liter of water. So which is the remarkable size of water. You just imagine 2 crore liter of water, just imagine how much big this figure is. So common man should be aware about where he can reduce his footprints of various things.
I just wanted to stir a pot a bit. And Charles, you mentioned about the fact that just giving up plastic or, going back, are we taking a step back? Is that what environmentalism is about? And I'm just wondering that in this garb of providing sources of energy to the poor, we actually lock ourselves into a very carbon-intensive economy. And I can say this for India because for the longest time we've been, our politicians have been telling us, we need those sources of energy. We need to pull people out of poverty. But whereas I find that all the hydropower, all the thermal power plants, whatever is being built, I'm not sure how many rural poor are being given access to those sources of energy. For the poor, we say, go for renewable energy. And for the city-based people, we say, let's build more malls, let's have more buildings which have 100 light bulbs in one room. So I'm just wondering if, we don't take the uncomfortable decisions. Like you're mentioning about half the glass of water, but what about our water footprint in cities or in the way we live, in our lifestyles? And I know there is a tendency to say, but no, we can't go back to living in the villages. And so I'm just wondering if that alternative, do we not have that? Is it that vision is hazy, and that's why as environmentalists we failed?
I think that this year is Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birth anniversary. And what you say is that we cannot go back to village. But the concept was going back to village was to strengthen the rural economy. No one want to leave their houses as it is. No, we are not getting job in village, that is why we are migrating to city. But there are, in village, huge capacity is there, huge strength is there. Unfortunately, we are not tapping that. We are just focusing. It means what is the definition of development? We are taking that as per our perception. Huge buildings, huge infrastructures, and huge other facilities means development. This is what is the definition of nowadays. But by the view of Gandhi, what is the definition of development? Development is self-sustaining personality has to be there. That personality has to develop through the grassroots level up to the top level. So that is why these are the...
But can I counter that? Do you think our policymakers are doing that? Do you think India's policies currently, especially on climate, are addressing that? You're an economist, so what do you think?
Yeah. As far as economy is concerned, definitely, population living in city, they have to sacrifice somewhere. Because, see, family of 3 or 4 persons, they are having independent 4-wheeler or 2-wheeler. So just think how much carbon emissions might be there. That is one thing. They are cooking food in their home and they are just giving it away to dustbin or that because they are having habit to eat outside. Okay, so footprints, they are having very high count. They are having those things which they are not using, but they are still holding that. That is against making a imbalance. So we have to make a balance while climate changes, serious issues are there. So the basic challenge in front of us, how to make a balanced lifestyle. And that is what is, the answer is there in Gandhian economy. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of observations. I don't know that living in the village is the efficiency, meets the efficiency needs that a more densely populated area. So I think that in terms of energy consumption, you can be more efficient in an urban setting. But I think
it means again, we have to work out the water efficiency, or we can say productivity
right.
of everything. productivity of water, productivity of efficiency of water, and the conversion ratio of water into cash for the development purpose.
Right, and I would add food, water into food. I think one of the key things that we've not mentioned yet is the need to be able to feed people, which goes back to the centrality of your water point is, any single issue. Water is not just an economic issue, it's a survival issue. And the quality of our water and the access to clean water, all those things tie into this. But I won't, I'll be cautious how I say this, I think, but I think when we look at, what we can do, I think we really have to recognize that this is a crisis. This is a genuine crisis that threatens humanity because we're the ones, both are affected by it, but we're the ones that have created it and can have the capacity to stop it. There's no other species on the planet that can solve this problem. And that's the wonderful, unique thing about being human. And but it is up to all of us to take that challenge.
But if you go into the food thing, I mean, telling everybody, it's nice. I mean, you can have this romantic vision of the way the simple world used to be, and people live in the village and had very few needs and whatever. But forcing people to go back to the village, even if you wanted to, and even if they wanted to, which is, I think, an incredible impediment on their liberty, but forcing people to go back to the village, those individual farmers are not efficient for creating the food that Stacy's talking about and feeding the cities, and almost industrial farms. But how do we look at the technology? Let's just not use the technology that exists now, but let's make sure we have the right technology to move forward. And I think it is important that we examine these technological options, that we're scientific about it. And if you look at how can you engage, I was reading something earlier on farmers in the Amazon. Now there's a lot of focus right now about the Amazon being burned and so on. And yes, the figures in 2019 are much higher than 2018. But if you go back 20 years and look at the figures of the amount of the Amazon that is burning are 70% less than they were in the first decade of the 21st century. And no one's paying attention at that time to the Amazon burning down. Now they're paying attention because the president of Brazil is a bit of an idiot. But so they're paying attention now, but actually it's come down, and the pressure is don't do anything. And Brazilians are saying, ignore the president for now, but sensible Brazilians are saying, yes, but we have a right as a poor country to feed our people. The farmers make up a very small amount. All this slash and burn you're hearing is another issue. But how do you co-opt the farmers? How do you make sure the farmers are a partner? If they burn the thing down, it's actually no good for them either. So there needs to be development that will involve the local people and say, why is this interesting to you? If you go to Africa, there's a lot of African elephants, for example, damage villages. Probably Indian elephants do this again, but I haven't read any stories about India on this. And so there's a lot of projects that say, right, the villagers need to be the ally in the preservation of animal species, which can be very destructive. You destroy the elephant's environment, it's going to come into your village and knock down your house. And you're not actually the one who destroyed the environment anyway. So get them to preserve the elephants, and then you give them the money to allow the development, and then all of this pays for itself and makes their lives better. And as there's been an improvement, if you look at historically, as technology improves, as societies get richer, they get cleaner. Because people, as they get richer, say, I don't want to live in that garbage. I'd like to live in a clean place. I want to be able to breathe the air. I don't want to live in Delhi. You can't breathe. I want to live in a place that has clean air. In China, you see this a lot as well. The communist regime is very oppressive, but one of the things that they were allowing outlet for was environmental protest and environmental action. What we need to do now, though, is because everything is accelerating, maybe our development is not accelerating fast enough to mitigate the climate change. Maybe we have to look for other routes to mitigate the climate change and to make our development accelerate even faster.
Let me just go back to the question again, once again, if I may, of what can you do? I think in this audience we have a unique set of characteristics. You're all communicators, And you have the ability to tell a lot more people and educate a lot more people in the stories you tell, in how you tell the stories. They can be woven into what you're writing. They don't have to be a book about environmentalism. They can be a story about whatever, any of these, urban living, rural living, whatever, and weave in the themes that will educate people on how a better way to approach life is that will help mitigate the climate problem.
Yeah, just a couple of comments, a couple of stories that I could quickly recollect. We talked about Gandhian thought, and we talked about villages and urban life and so on. And we also talked about migration, where now in India, village youth are moving towards cities. Okay, that's largely the picture. But we have some stories. So a couple of villages in Amravati district of Maharashtra, close to Melghat, which I visited a year ago, they got forest rights. They got community forest rights. So now a substantial land is owned by the Gram Sabha. Okay, and then actually that was forest land on paper. There was nothing. They were barren hills. Under forest department, the land was a forest department land where there was no forest. Now, when people got right on it, they grew forest, but of course they grew more of their species of their interest, more of livelihood species. But now that has been a forest, the effect is substantial youth return to villages because they saw a new livelihood in that. Okay, so it is not that it's all a one-way traffic. On the one hand, yes, these migrations are going to happen, but on the other hand, if you manage microhabitat, and which the common man can substantially do, if you manage the microhabitat, you can dampen the effects and to some extent even reverse the effects.
It means minimize the needs and maximize the happiness. That is, that is what, because without, I think that when we are thinking about the management and all these things, there should be a holistic and integrated approach of management of all these natural resources. So that is the one way to control climate changes and all these things. What Barkha would like.
Bahar.
Sorry.
That follows me everywhere, no problem. Since you asked the question about what can we do as individuals, and I'm always motivated by stories. I know the conversation went in the direction of there is a crisis, and of course there's a crisis, but I found, and I was in the same sort of, doomsday kind of mental state that, oh my God, for 10 years I've been reporting on deforestation and, all the things that are going wrong. And then I told myself, I'm going to take 2 years and just travel around India and see all that is going right. And I came across incredible examples. We have the smallest pig in the world, the pygmy hog. We're the only country that is breeding this in captivity and putting it back in protected areas. There's so much to celebrate. We're the only country in the world that has banned, the drug which leads to vultures being wiped out. Europe has yet to ban that drug. We've done it. At a policy level, we've said we're going to ban this drug because it's killing our vultures. So there's a lot of positive examples. I went to this vulture breeding center where they've actually, the Indian charpai, our traditional Indian charpais, they're using that as machans for the vultures to rest on, because what they found was if they put just cement planks, they're not able to perch on them. Just simple things we are doing. They went and did surveys. I found scientists who were going undercover, and they wanted to see if the drug had been completely wiped out. So the scientists became detectives, and they found out that yes, in certain locations, the drug which was killing the vultures had been removed from the environment, so the vultures can be reintegrated back in the natural environment. There's some fantastic work going on in India. I came across in the Chambal River, which is known for dacoits. I found that there were these riverside incubatories, which is basically in the sand. They have all the eggs for the turtles, and these are being watched now by poacher turned protectors. They wait for the hatchlings to come out and they release them in the river, just to make sure that the stray dogs and the poachers don't get to them. There's some fantastic work going on, and I think we don't applaud ourselves enough for that.
And I was making the comment that it's more efficient to live in urban settings. It does not mean that villages cannot be modernized and life improved, the quality of life improved, while improving the environmental impact.
Yeah. I have a couple of related questions, and to everyone, so we can have a quick round before the audience question time begins. So, one question is about the naive environmentalism, which is quite around. Naive environmentalism. Okay, so people, of course, with good intentions, okay, want to protect trees or want to do this or want to do that. So, this is when it is in front of their eyes. Okay, if so many trees are being cut behind their eyes, they actually don't mind. Okay, but there is something happening in front of their eyes. The other side of it is any development would lead to some destruction, or any act, any project would have its own pros and cons. Okay, but people only look at partial aspect of it and then decide either to resist it or support it. Okay, so this is a kind of side taking without being analytical, and that is extremely common. Okay. Now, here the job of researchers, my second question is, here the job of researchers who can actually analyze the situation and look at what are the environmental costs, what are the benefits, is it worth, and so on, are important. But what seems to me is there is a lack of communication between researchers and activists. Okay, they need to be in dialogue with each other more frequently and more fruitfully. So, do you know stories where such a dialogue has actually worked?
What you say, that is perfectly right. There is a gap between researcher and activists, because the researcher doesn't want to go on specifically in particular field work. Sometimes it's offline research, online research, sometimes it's on field line research. So research takes a very important role in entire development of any city or any community or whatever it may be. And one another point is that whenever we are thinking about the changing habits, so we cannot particularly say, yes, this is bad or this is right. Whatever may be bad for me, that might be right for him. So there is some dilemma about all these things.
Well, I think in a number of areas I've seen in the United States where activists are working with the scientific community in the area of clean air and clean water, certainly, not so much, I'm thinking of development per se, but there's also not a lot of activism around development per se in the U.S. So that would.
In the U.S. as well, but not just the U.S., but there's activism, but it tends to be against development. So, yeah, as you say, don't tear down that tree. I like it. And I mean, one case that's going on in the UK right now is they're trying to build a high-speed rail line from the north of England to London. This will cut down air transport. Air transport is very polluting. Trains are less polluting. It will also, by having more train options, will get more cars off the road. But they have to put the tracks down somewhere. So they're cutting a few trees. They're going through places to put the tracks down to be able, and a high-speed train line can't go like that. So they have to go more or less straight, or else the train goes off the rails at those speeds. So that is a trade-off. They have done an environmental impact assessment. I hope they're planting trees somewhere else for everyone they take down. That I don't know about. But even if they weren't, the overall quality of the environment, the overall reduction of emissions is so huge that this is a positive thing. But you get local environmentalists in their villages or their towns saying, don't put that track through there, you'll tear down a few trees. And so that's, and what I don't know as well is how much has the government, which is preoccupied with another issue right now, how much are they communicating to the public transparently the decision-making process? Because if everybody knows, yes, we're losing these trees, but here's all the benefits. government decisions should always, no matter what they're about, environment or anything, be transparent. And then there's always going to be someone who hates it, but you can win over the majority of the voters and say, in the total, this is a good policy.
So, Charles, you couldn't have given a better example, because actually this drama is playing out in Mumbai right now, where there is the RA forest. The metro wants to build their shed right over there. And a lot of, we've had Amitabh Bachchan tweeting and saying, well, it's going to, save us from pollution. My response to that would be that, yes, maybe from an ecology point of view, those trees are not endangered, they're fairly common trees. My problem is that in India, we don't have enough land. So to go and destroy this green lung, scientists will say destroy it, it doesn't matter, it's not endangered, it's not threatened, there are no endangered species there. My point is that I think it gives urban citizens a connect to green issues, therefore it has a value. I think I stand with the citizens of RA who are protesting right now. I think that the metro shed could be built elsewhere, and I mean, I'm just saying this on record. I feel that it's all very well to say let's plant trees elsewhere. Where's the land for that? In fact, the government does have a land for the metro shed, which is not a forest. So,
according to me, actually, we have to now concentrate some good rural area for the development. There is a huge burden on Mumbai, Pune, or metro cities like Delhi.
Where are our rural areas? Rural areas are being diverted for industrial projects, or dams, or hydro, or linear infrastructure. So there's no end to it.
But there is one very bad thing, that whenever we are thinking about the development, whenever government comes with the good, creative, constructive schemes, and there is one group of activists, those activists' role is only to oppose government, not to take positive, constructive role. But they are just opposing government because they are having vested interest. That is what is my observation while working in the water governance sector. Whatever it may be. No, ye hona hi nahi denge hum. Arre, why you are not going to get it?
Yeah.
Your next generation will be very much suffered with some these all things. So you should not be always in opposition mode. कभी कभी तो थोड़ा पॉजिटिव सोचना चाहिए कि नहीं सोचना चाहिए. The government is spending a huge crores of rupees on all these schemes, and just one overnight, one guy come and said that, this will not happen. We don't want metro in Pune. We don't want everything. There are solutions for environmental issues. Technologies are there. Good peoples are there. So why don't you come up with? That is just because of public doesn't want to take any responsibility. Common man doesn't want to take any responsibility. जो भी कुछ करना है मोदी करे, जो भी कुछ करना है government करे. So there must be transparency. In government sector, in government line also. Transparency, accountability, participation of common public, access to justice, and responsiveness. If these 5 things are there, definitely our environmental or climate change situation, as far as India is concerned, will be very much better in coming years.
Yeah. The monitor tells us that it's time for audience questions, but I would request you only questions. Okay, opinions, debates, and comments we can have over a cup of coffee after the session. So only pointed questions.
Yeah, I would be putting a very basic principle of a Darwin's survival the fittest, which is getting failure. It is coming to survival the weakest. Now, would you like to go for any counter theory in this session or any mission? That's all.
Yeah, so looks like this is too philosophical and fundamental, which will take a long time, but I would be happy to talk to you later. Okay, yeah, someone had raised a hand there.
So my question is mostly for Bahar. So we right now talk mostly about the policymakers' role and common man's role, how they can respond. I want to ask you about role of media, and I want to clarify that I just don't mean journalism. I mean pop culture, I mean advertising, I mean filmmaking, I mean social media, because like the time when we are talking about environmentalism here over, we are all going to go home, we are going to see our televisions, expecting those luxurious sets, expecting one day having those houses, aspiring for them, which are going to make a huge impact on our ecological lives. So are we ready to make that sacrifice when from all the sides, the particular lifestyle is propagating us through advertisements and television channels, etc., etc.?
Should I answer that? Great question. Thank you so much for it. I agree with you that television in one form promotes a consumptive lifestyle, and are we willing to take that step back? But I think that I don't know about TV journalism these days. I must confess, I have taken a step back from it. I write more now. TV journalism today has become about studios and shouting at each other. So I don't subscribe to that. But from my heydays of journalism, when reporters used to go out, we would go out and tell the bad stories. We would tell the stories which need to be told. We would not be scared of dissent. We would not be scared that a politician would call up and say, drop the story. My editor would carry that story. My stories, I'm glad to note, actually helped save a wetland, they helped save a forest. And every time I did a story, I know, sir, you could call me an activist for doing that. I think my job was to tell the story of the trees, the wildlife, the species which no one was telling. So I consider that as my role. About consumptive lifestyle, I agree with you. There is a dichotomy that big news channels are owned by big corporate houses. I think that's a larger question on how do we fund media, and I think it's already happening. Digital media is the way forward. Nobody wants to carry my story about this polluting industry. I'm going to put it out on Twitter. I think that's the way forward. That's how you play level playing field.
I worked, when I was living in Los Angeles, I worked in Hollywood, and in the mid-'70s, the Hollywood community established a thing called the Earth Communications Office. And it was an activist group of Hollywood actors and producers and directors, many very famous. And they had three agenda, they had a three agenda platform. The first was to get the industry itself to clean up. The second, which meant that executives weren't going to be driving big cars, that film stock was going to be recycled. There was a whole number of things. It's a chemical industry, essentially. So, set design, all these things where they started incorporating more environmentally sound practices. The third piece of it was using their platform as familiar faces to promote environmental issues. And actually there was a fourth, and that was really quite central, in fact, that they helped provide the expertise so filmmakers, television producers could bring in themes like I was describing you could do in writing, bring in environmental themes into their own production. So if you're doing a science fiction movie, you may want to have an expert on trash removal or whatever the topic is, and the Earth Communication Office would make sure that they had the expertise available. And it was a very successful program. It went on for a number of years. There were some specific shows that came out of it. There was a kids show called Captain Planet, right? Thank you. So it was, it can be done, and it is something that can be done by industry, and I think it's something that could probably be enhanced and revived now.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, there.
Hi. Couple of questions. First would be, do you think that activists today, they let governments and decision makers off the hook by really focusing on very simplistic issues and solutions? Take example of RA, as you mentioned, or a bullet train project, which is maybe a linear in nature. You will have few thousand trees cut, but overall, because it is an electric train, it will replace X number of vehicles. It is very easy to counter that. It will net, it will actually save so much of carbon footprint. You are not, maybe activist is not necessarily asking a fundamental question as to whether I need to develop very few cities where everyone migrates to, or whether I need more cities. So do you think because we want easy headlines and ED hashtags, we are sort of letting governments out of hook by being very focusing on very easy issues which are very clickbait? Thank you.
That is what is the basic, as I told earlier, there is two groups in activist, pro-government and opposite government. And out of that, there is no middle activist group who can think rationally. No one is thinking rationally in media, in NGOs or any activity department also of social science, if we are considering. Everyone is thinking ki, nahi, and there is one fourth category of activists, those who are sponsored activists. those are having the time limit, and they are having short-term gaining issues with them. So what you are saying is perfectly right, because if developments arises, definitely some footprints are going to be reduced, definitely some opportunities are going to create, definitely some good things will be coming, and time saving might be there. So we have to consider all these things. Every time it is not necessary to do opposition. कुछ भी कोई करने लगा तो चलो उसको oppose करो. So this kind of habit we should not entertain.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think sometimes it's very easy to talk about RA forests, but it's far tougher that there may be some village communities, for instance, in rural Maharashtra who may have been protesting for 20 years against something, but no newspaper, no TV channel will ever cover them. And I think that is the sad story of our media. There is the tyranny of distance, which is that it's easy to get an OB van in Bombay and it's easy to show those trees, but the trees which are being cut, you know, in somebody else's backyard, which is 500 kilometers away, the OB vans don't go there. So I completely agree with you.
So the monitor is showing time up. I know that there are lots of questions. There is so much to be said, but I presume with the consent of everyone that you can email us. We can continue the dialogue. We can continue the dialogue today and tomorrow over there over a cup of coffee, and you can also contact us in any other way. Thank you.